Ignite your curiosity with Austin Next. We're watching Austin transform from a thriving ecosystem into a global superstar. With our host, Jason Scharf, we aspire to better comprehend the true nature of innovation. Together, we will uncover what makes a successful ecosystem and navigate the technologies shaping our future. Now let's dive into what's next.
Nothing motivates a parent to action like a sick child. And for the Andrews family, words like no and impossible became mere roadblocks on their journey to help their kids. Our guests, Pam and Chris Andrews, founders of the Firefly Fund, turned their battle with their daughter's rare genetic disorder into a mission to revolutionize rare disease research and treatment here in Austin and beyond. Pam is the co-founder and executive director of Firefly Fund, leading the organization's 4 initiatives, including 1, support for translational medical research, 2, advancing efforts to expand newborn screening and whole genomic sequencing at birth, 3, patient access, 4, creation of a pediatric rare disease diagnostic research and treatment center at UT's Dell Medical School. Pam also continues her service as a Texas public health official, as a member of the Newborn Screening Advisory Committee at the Texas Department of State Health Services. Chris Andrews is an attorney at the Texas Medical Board by day and a citizen scientist for various rare diseases by night. Chris is a graduate of Texas A&M School of Law. Prior to law school, Chris worked primarily in the financial and investment industry. Most importantly, Chris and Pam are the proud parents of Belle and Abby. Tell me about Firefly. What's the origin? What's its mission? And how do you go about accomplishing it?
Thanks for having us today. Firefly Fund, we founded, my husband and I founded Firefly Fund. Really, it was a reflex in 2016 after the diagnosis of both of our daughters with Niemann-Pick type C. Our mission is to fund and support the research and education necessary to accelerate a cure for rare genetic diseases that affect children and currently have no cure. And we were inspired, like I said, by the diagnosis of both of our daughters with Niemann-Pick type C in 2016. When our daughters were diagnosed, we were handed a Make-A-Wish form, and there was nothing available to us. There were no FDA-approved drugs, and it took us several years to get diagnosed. And really, the foundation is what I believe is an answer to a call that is in the 21st century, with all of the technologies available to us in whole genomic sequencing, there is no need for the interminable diagnostic odyssey that families are traveling to get answers. Answers are available to families really quickly now. So as soon as a mom sees that a baby is struggling and she's looking for answers for her baby, there is no reason that mom can't get answers about what is going on and the health status of her baby right away. So that's really what drives us every single day, is to get answers for these children, like we were able to do for our daughters. It took entirely too long with our daughters. And, Belle and Abby, our girls, the trajectory of their lives is very different. And it's different based on the timing of intervention. So our older daughter was diagnosed symptomatically after, years long diagnostic odyssey. And our younger daughter was diagnosed before visible signs or symptoms of the disease at 18 months old. It allowed us to intervene with her, whether it's off-label or physical therapy or what have you, but it allowed us to make choices about interventions before the disease onset. She's now 10 years old and has no symptoms of Niemann-Pick type C. And we're very proud of that, but we've worked very hard. And what we want to do is be able to translate some of our learnings for other families, right here at home in our community. So that's really what prompted the gift to the Dell Medical School.
So talk to me, let's kind of dive into that then. So you give a $5 million gift to the Dell Med to establish the Center for Rare Disease at UT. Yep. What is the center doing on a day-to-day basis? What does that actually look like?
Yeah. And I want to be clear too about the gift. The gift is a 5-year commitment from the Firefly Fund to partner with the Dell Medical School and the Center for Rare Disease to help them build what we hope will be a center that can help families of children with rare genetic diseases for generations to come. So what we did was launch the very first step, which was the announcement of our commitment over the next 5 years to give $1 million a year for the next 5 years to the Center for Rare Disease and to build this center that we hope will be a gift to families in Central Texas for generations to come. So let's be clear about what it was. So it's a partnership that we entered into with the Dell Medical School to build this center. And the very first step was to bring some experts down here. We have some boots on the ground already and we're all, working together to build this.
No, I appreciate the clarification. So what will be in the practical terms with that center and helping families? What does that actually mean? Are we going to be testing children, as you said, like bringing that diagnostic Odyssey faster when they're seeing symptoms? Is it, they're going to have a whole bunch of, sequencing machines? Is it, people, doing drug discovery? What's actually going on at the center?
I think it's all of those things. I think, and Chris can jump in too. And I think it's all of those things. So for us, when we were diagnosed, it was, okay, where are the KOLs for Niemann-Pick type C? That means key opinion leaders. Where are they in the world? So we had to get connected with those people. Were there clinical trials? Okay, where are the clinical trials? Are they involved with the NIH? Where are the centers of gravity, if you will, for the different diseases? There's not going to be an expert for every single disease in every town. And that's certainly not the mission of Firefly. We're not just trying to recruit doctors to Austin in every single of the 10,000 rare diseases. That's not the goal. The goal is to help these children sooner so that they can get therapies sooner, so that they can have better health outcomes, live longer, and not have such complications from all of these rare diseases. So the goal is to help these children faster. When we were diagnosed, we waited for a year to get in to see a doctor. And then, and we traveled Diagnostic Odyssey that included 12 to 15 experts, pediatric orthopedic specialists, neurologists, endocrinologists. We went to several doctors when we were looking for answers for our daughter. And
so is the Diagnostic Odyssey driven due to the lack of people understanding we should be doing things like whole genome sequencing, or is it a lack of availability?
So the healthcare system, Jason, as you know, is designed around diagnosing and treating symptoms. And so when you start talking about preventing illness, we are suddenly asking the system to do things that it's not designed to do, right? And so, especially in rare disease, where Chris and I are learning, and really our key opinion leaders are learning from the children on the front lines right now. I think the doctors in the Niemann-Pick type C community are learning from Bell and Abby in real time that knowing earlier it improves health outcomes. Treating before you see symptoms, especially neurological symptoms, makes it is a life-saving difference. It's a matter of life and death if you can treat them before you have the visible symptoms. And so I think that they're learning that real time. And I believe, my personal opinion as a mom, my intuition is that with all of these genetic diseases, the sooner, if you're waiting to see symptoms, if you're waiting for people to be tripping and falling, if you're waiting to see dysarthria, if you're waiting to see dystonia, if you're waiting to see these symptoms, then by the time you see the symptom and you finally get in to see a doctor and then a specialist, you are in the third or fourth inning of the disease. And so it's very difficult with Niemann-Pick type C, especially with the neurological diseases, which lysosomal storage diseases affect children. 60 of the 70 are neurodegenerative. A child is born with one every 30 minutes. They affect 1 in 5,000 kids. So we're not talking about by themselves, they may be rare, but as a group, they affect a lot of kids, and they're all neurodegenerative. And if you wait to see the symptoms, you've waited too long. So that's the part of the system we're trying to get at. How do you get to these kids when the mom says, my kid did not crawl on time? My baby did not do this on time. My baby has a global developmental delay. How do you get to those kids at that point? Sorry, babe. Yeah.
It's okay. But, Jason, I think another thing about a rare disease center in the middle of Texas and in Austin also has to do with logistics and demographics. Texas is the biggest state. We have a population that's larger than most small European countries. We could be a country on our own, and there's some who think we are. But the fact is that if you have a rare disease in Texas and you want to see a KOL, or you want to, narrow down your diagnosis, you may have to go to one of the coasts. You may have to go to the East Coast, or you may have to go to the West Coast. You're going to have to travel all over the place. If you're going to start a trial, you may have to fly to that trial. When we were diagnosed and when we started getting treatment, it wasn't available. It wasn't possible for us to get treatment in Austin, Texas. We had to fly to Chicago on our own dime, and every 2 weeks to be able to get treatment. And we would sit in the waiting room with other patients from Texas who were doing the exact same thing. And you think, well, Texas is one of the strongest, largest states in the country, and yet somehow we're having to go someplace else to do this. It seems like, just from a pure demographic argument, that Texas and particularly Austin, with our growth, is the ideal setting for a rare disease center. And it's just to be able to treat more patients who are closer to us. If you're in Kansas, do you want to go to the NIH in Maryland, or do you want to come down to Austin? We're right here. It's a question of being able to get somewhere where you can get the diagnosis. And
what Chris and I really noticed, especially during the pandemic, what really we thought was made clear to the rest of the world during the pandemic, that rare disease families already knew, was that telemedicine, there are technologies that we have access to that can break some of these barriers in healthcare. And that's where I think the University of Texas can come in and really help drive forward some change in our system, whether it's through AI or different technologies like whole genomic sequencing. But there's a way to, this all feels so clunky and barbaric in the rare disease space, because we're trying to make rare diseases fit into the regular healthcare system, and it's completely different because the numbers are so different.
So I want to pull a thread on the UT and bringing together innovations. We have a lot of bio and health innovation going on in Austin, and especially in the areas you talk about, whether it be in telehealth specifically or AI development, either on, AI drug discovery or different elements of the tech stack, specifically in bio. One of the issues that I've seen in Austin is that the disconnect between the innovation ecosystem and UT, it's not been able to bring those two things together. They kind of sit a bit in different spheres, partially because of the bureaucratic nature of the university, right? It's a large university. It's hard to get things out. It's hard to get things in. I'm not saying anything I think anybody outside the university or inside the university doesn't know. So
Right.
How do you see the kind of the center helping to bridge that, given those challenges?
Well, I think my thoughts on that subject are evolving, right? Because like I said in the beginning of the podcast, this is a partnership. We've entered into a long-term relationship with the University of Texas to build the Center for Rare Disease. What Chris and I, what our vision is and what we believe is, and what we've heard the dean say, the dean has said, the University of Texas is interested in precision medicine, right? Right here at home, they're going to help build precision medicine. And I believe there's no better group of people to help light the way for precision medicine than the rare disease community. Because the way that we're approving drugs for rare diseases, the way that we're treating rare diseases, it's as close as you're going to get to precision medicine. I mean, these are super small groups, right now we're trying to get a drug approved in the Niemann-Pick type C community for a drug that 50 kids are taking. So it's a very small, group. And so I believe there's no better group to light the way and to show the University of Texas how to do precision medicine than the rare disease community. Now that being said, our goal with the Center for Rare Disease is much bigger than just discovery and drug development and innovation. It also has to do with bringing these families together and making sure they have the resources they need early so that they can make decisions about the health status of their newborns early and they can intervene early. And so it's just trying to really put an end to the unnecessary and lengthy diagnostic odyssey that families travel. There should be no need for diagnostic odysseys anymore. The information is available for families.
As far as the interest going, I mean, as far as building momentum behind it, I think obviously it will take time, but this is a natural progression for Austin. It's the same progression that San Francisco and Silicon Valley, Boston saw like over the many years. Is first you have a tech boom, and then you start to migrate closer into biotech. I think it's just a question of time. And the more people that know about this rare disease center, we should attract biotech to Austin for many reasons, including many of them being that it's economically more feasible to run a biotech in Austin, Texas, than it is to run it in Boston or San Francisco. So I think as word gets out and as we continue to develop, we will generate momentum, and it will.
Actually, just give me a few stats. The number one over the last 5 years sector for VC funding in Austin is bio and health. We're the top 10 for that for VC funding in the nation. So it's already happening here. It looks different than Silicon Valley. It looks different than the Bay. We're more about the intersection of biohealth and tech. If you want to go build the next cell therapy company, I recommend going to Boston. If you want to build the next small molecule, the same thing. But if you want to build something at the intersection of AI and you say telemedicine or care delivery, really it's the bio innovation tech stack and the business of health that's something that Austin really thrives at. And so it's interesting because when we think about, and I've had this discussion both on air and off before, and I think rare disease is something that kind of sits at the middle of this. Is I think that rare disease we think of so often. I know we were talking about this a little bit offline before we started to hit record. We approach it so often as a scientific problem, right? Because we got 50 kids, 100 kids, 10,000, whatever it may be, that are having this issue, and at its core, it's a business model problem, right? Because if I'm going to develop a drug for 10,000 people, the math doesn't really work out, right? If I've got to do $100 million clinical trial and all of this, it doesn't really work out for $1 billion drug. And so in many ways, the way I think about this is if we can actually solve the business model problem and addressing it, whether it's whatever subscriptions, whether it be different types of ways to think about addressing the business model, then the science actually takes care of itself, because then the resources flow in a very different type of direction. And I think that one of the issues that I always get a little bit frustrated on, and this is from just being in the space, is that we spend so much energy on here's the next dollar to go do the research, and then less on how do we think about changing the way that we deliver care, deliver the business, change it. It's always here's a 5%, 10% better invention. And I think rare disease, if we can solve the rare disease conundrum, so many different types of these problems get solved at the same time.
I think that's right. And I've never heard it sort of characterized that way, Jason, but I think you're right. And I think with rare disease, I think we call it rare disease. I think it used to be called the children with disabilities, or it used to be called children with special needs. Now it's called rare disease. But I actually think in the future, where we're headed is that this is just going to be genetics. This is just healthcare. This is just understanding the root cause of these diseases. And what we will learn from rare disease is that Alzheimer's, right, is the symptomatic term for probably some genetic diseases that we're learning about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if every single disease is a rare disease, if you kind of characterize it that way, to your point, if we live in the N of one world, then everything, then the entire business model is flipped on its head, and then they're all
Yep.
treated that way.
Well,
Yes,
I mean, I think
that's
there's,
right.
I think particularly with Alzheimer's, there's a great argument. If we don't know what causes Alzheimer's, how do we know that Alzheimer's isn't many diseases that have very similar pathologies? I mean, it's,
I mean, look, if you look
Well,
at
and they
oncology,
call Niemann-Pick type C. They
right.
call Niemann-Pick type C the disease that my girls have. They call it childhood Alzheimer's. Well, I don't know that it's childhood Alzheimer's. I mean, I don't know that it's childhood Alzheimer's, but I know that their disease looks like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS all combined into one.
if you look at
know?
oncology, and someone's going to correct me
Yeah.
on the dates on this, but I make it up. I'll go back 50 years. Blood-borne cancer was leukemia and lymphoma, and that was the entire categorization. Well, today there's hundreds of categorizations below that, because we understand the genetic markers and classifications of those types of diseases. Alzheimer's, to your point, even today, it's dementia, Alzheimer's, Lewy bodies. We're beginning to do that types of categorizations, and there are many that have the hypothesis that the reason that we have 152 Alzheimer's drugs that have failed is because we actually have heterogeneous populations, because to your point,
Yes.
we're trying to treat one group with drugs that are going after many different things.
Yes. So the
So
drugs.
I think we talked a little. We talked a little bit about this earlier, and I always go back to this is that I think the gateway to treating some of these larger diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's is actually through rare disease, and particularly if you look at Alzheimer's, where you don't really have an animal model that has Alzheimer's because we don't know what causes Alzheimer's. So you have animal models that have the symptoms of Alzheimer's. So when they're treated with whatever Flonase or apple cider vinegar or whatever the next thing that comes out on my newsfeed is, reverses Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's mice. Those mice don't have Alzheimer's, and then you take these drugs and you take them to people, and then everyone's mystified that they don't work. Oh my God, I can't believe it works so great in the Alzheimer's mouse model. The problem is that mouse doesn't have Alzheimer's. Now
We've cured cancer in mice so many times.
Oh yeah, exactly. But if you look at a rare disease animal model, that animal has the rare disease. They have been genetically modified to have that disease. Niemann-Pick has a cat model, which is a naturally occurring cat model. That cat has Niemann-Pick. When you develop a treatment that addresses pathologies that are similar to those of Alzheimer's, or similar to those of Parkinson's, and you develop it for a rare disease, that drug is far more likely to transfer over and be efficient and effective for some of these larger diseases, because you have real animal model data that shows that it addressed the pathology. I think when you're talking about a business model for a company that's starting out, it would make sense to first go through rare disease to get to the next level. If you have a drug that works with Niemann-Pick, that there is a correction in Tau buildup or neurofibular tangles or whatever else, and that drug can be developed and put into trial for a rare disease, which you're talking about 50 patients or so, it's a lot less expensive than 1,000-person trial for Alzheimer's. But if you can prove efficiency there and get your phase 1 safety data, you have shortened your runway to go after Alzheimer's, and your likelihood of success is much higher. And so I think sometimes when you're looking at rare disease, maybe it's not necessarily about how much money can we make off of rare disease. Maybe it's how much money can we make once we get past it, after we get approved for a rare disease and we go after a larger, where we don't have to spend as much money and we can shorten our runway.
Well, you see a lot of that in oncology, starting with they start with the last line of defense, fourth line therapies, and then kind of slowly make their way through, eventually getting to be first line, and kind of with the growing expansion. my question, I want to I want to play devil's advocate for a moment on this. It's an interesting model, as you said, because then if you say I take the rare disease and then kind of grow it, from a difficulty and cost perspective, while you'll have a smaller trial, but then your recruitment side of the trial is going to be much more difficult, given by its nature, it's a rare disease. It's going to be
Yeah.
finding the patients and all of that is going to be much, much harder.
Well, I mean, I think you're gonna. It's gonna depend on gonna depend on what disease for one thing. But I think like as you get more screening efforts, particularly in places like the Middle East, particularly in places like China, where we have no idea what the rare disease situation is in China. But even just running, screens in places like the Middle East, I know they picked up lots of Niemann Pick kids like in the Middle East. There's more than you think, and you can't go through
Unfortunately.
like if you look at Niemann Pick. Niemann Pick is a weird one because the pathology of it, or the I guess the presentation of it, is different by age of onset. So a child that's diagnosed very very young, or what that looks like is completely different than what it might look like when you're diagnosed at 45, which looks more like schizophrenia. So you have patients that are undoubtedly been diagnosed as schizophrenic, and they don't really understand why, and suddenly that patient kind of declines and dies, and at the end of it they're like, well, we have no idea what that was.
Well,
And
and it looks, I mean, it looks like schizophrenia, but there were two brothers that were diagnosed at the age of 32, and they lived at, I don't know, in the Northeast somewhere. And I remember the mom explaining that, she would think that they were coming home from the bars drunk. They had ataxia, slushy speech. I mean, some of the symptoms look similar. A lot of like Chris was saying, psychiatry, involvement. Um, so she thought that they were like drinking too much, but they were, when they would come home, and they had nothing, but they just had symptoms of Niemann-Pick type C, and it was the adult onset, the ataxia and the slurred speech and the shaky hands. So
I guess to say, there's more rare disease patients out there than we have in.
there's one
I
in
think
10 people have a rare disease, and half of those are children. Yeah, that's 15 million children living in the United States.
It's not so rare when you look at them all together.
It's not. It's 15 million people. 15 million children are living in the United States with rare disease, and 33 million adults, are living in the United States with a rare disease. I mean, if we have 330 million people living in the United States and 1 in 10 has a rare disease, you're looking at a pretty large group.
So how do you think that, I mean, something like Firefly, and we see a lot of, I think, in the rare disease space, these kind of parent and patient advocacy groups really kind of come up. What do you think the role in general, I want to kind of beyond Firefly, that groups like this play, and especially as we're kind of getting into that, I think that the innovations that are needed are more than just, as we said, more than just the scientific innovation, right? It's new ways of thinking, new innovations and models, new innovations in kind of how we do things. What roles do they play on a broader scale?
Dave, do you want to answer, or do you want me to?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, so I think one of the things is we're talking about the way that I think that a lot of this can change is we need new approaches. And it's not just, as we said, it's not just here's a new scientific way of approaching it, but new models, new ways of doing companies, new innovations. And do you see that organizations, either parent or patient advocacy groups, things like Firefly, actually helping to drive innovations in this space, either actually going and forming companies or new models or new ways of doing things? Do you see these types of organizations helping to drive that innovation itself?
So I guess where I fall on that is that nobody has the sense of urgency that a mother or a father have. So there's that, right? So nobody's going to push as hard. Nobody wants answers faster, better answers sooner than the parents whose house is on fire and whose child is inside the house. So it is, you're not going to find a more dedicated person out there to address these issues than the family. So I think that that's something that you can't just hire people to do. So that's the challenge you see, Jason. I mean, the companies, if parents aren't involved, and then you just have commercial interests, right? If the families aren't involved in protecting the children in this process, then it's just commercial interest after commercial interest. And there's a lot of money to be made in this community, as as you're seeing, like right before your eyes. I mean, the drugs that are being developed for Niemann-Pick type C, let's be clear, these companies know that if it treats Niemann-Pick type C, it also treats Parkinson's, and it also has a great deal of chance of treating Alzheimer's and ALS. They definitely know that.
So
we get tossed around in the middle a lot. Yeah,
I think that one of the major tasks that we've been, so definitely for the last 3 or 4 years, is there's an element of advocacy that's needed to help clear the pathway for approval for drugs, for rare disease drugs. And part of that is the FDA, it has in the past has not shown a clear understanding of what is an effective outcome with a rare disease drug. And many of these drugs are evaluated in the FDA by professionals who don't necessarily have any understanding of what rare disease is and what is an effective treatment. And I think part of that, to bring these companies closer, like more involved in rare disease, is to give that pathway through advocacy so that their drugs are evaluated by the FDA, by rare disease specialists who understand rare disease. Part of the reason it's hard to get a rare disease drug approved is because the people who are doing the analysis are not necessarily rare disease specialists. So our job is to be advocates for they say, oh, I don't know how many times where it's been suggested that the Niemann-Pick community or any rare disease community just wants a drug, and we'll do anything for a drug, whether it works or not. And somebody at the FDA says, well, this drug doesn't work. They don't necessarily have rare disease experience, but they're like, oh, this drug doesn't work. And it's just those crazy parents. They just want a drug. And really, it's not that rare disease parents are not interested in drugs that don't work. I mean, nobody is. Nobody is. We're not out there just seeking, oh, we just want a drug. The FDA has to listen to the advocacy groups who have the experience in the drug, because frankly, the advocacy groups have more experience than the FDA in the drug, and in the disease and in the drug. And so part of that is getting the approval process to improve that approval process so that more people are interested in going into rare disease. You're muted.
Yeah, last night I was talking to one of the doctors from Dell Children's, Dr. Jim Gibson, and he's a metabolic geneticist here in town. He's been with us on our journey, from the very beginning. In fact, he diagnosed the girls, and he was talking to somebody that was at our event and said, well, my goodness, you had 3 drugs approved this week for Niemann-Pick type C. And by the way, Dr. Gibson sees every patient in the state of Texas with Niemann-Pick type C. They make their way to Austin. And so, or nearly every patient, he said. So they were asking, which drug are you going to give them first? And he said, no, I'm an interventional geneticist. Let's be clear. We're taking a play from cancer. And now, with genetic rare diseases, really, we need multiple treatments treating multiple pathways. And so the clinical community, and I think that what we saw this week with the FDA was a real tip of the hat to that knowledge, sort of that data that's coming out, that these genetic diseases do need multiple therapies treating multiple pathways. We saw 3 compounds, 3 small molecules approved in 1 week, in 5 days, for Niemann-Pick type C. And that is, to me, the biggest takeaway is that is communication to, the rare disease community, that the FDA now understands and is willing to approve multiple drugs treating multiple pathways for these rare diseases. None of them are going to be one and done. None of these are going to have one small molecule that's going to cure the disease. Not going to happen.
It's very rare that you have a single pathway, single shot kind of situation, unless you're going like we have now with like some of the CRISPR stuff, where it's like I have this.
CRISPR, yes.
Yeah, we have the
Yeah.
single. We have the even then. Why sickle cell has been the first one. It is a single gene that you can make a switch on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the difficulty, I think, for the rare disease company is that the companies don't like that, okay? The market share of a little bit of a rare disease group is not very much market share. And so what we have to be able to do is really, as advocates, I think just shine a light on how translatable these drugs can be. Like you said, we flipped it on its head. If there are drugs that have been approved for Niemann-Pick type C, let's say we have 4 or 5 small molecules, there are other disease groups that should be able to benefit from some of those compounds. We shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. We should have classes of drugs that can be used for, like, say, the lysosomal storage diseases.
I think there are lots of opportunities, and I think one thing I pounded the table on this a lot is when we look at both scientific achievements and invention and mix that with changes to business models and the way that we deliver care and these inventions, that's when I think the real opportunity space comes and changes the game. And I think rare disease is one of those areas that is solving that and attacking that space has really interesting downstream possibilities on lots of other spaces as well. I think this has been really fascinating and a great conversation. I do always like to end with the same question. Pam, Chris, so what's next, Austin?
I think, one of the things that I like to hold on to is that I don't think that we necessarily have all the answers. And what I really love about our partnership with the University of Texas is something that my dad used to say, and he died 28 years ago, but he used to say, it's when you begin to know that you don't know that you really know. And that's what I love about this partnership with the University of Texas is it's letting, let's see what the innovation is. Let's see how the intersection of technology and healthcare really can transform healthcare. Because I think that rare disease can light the way and inform the way that we do precision medicine for generations to come. So that's what we want through the Center for Rare Disease here in Austin, is for it to evolve and unfold in a partnership with the rare disease community, where all of the organizations, with the various rare disease groups, whether it's the Batten disease group or, the Duchenne group, or, there's lots of rare kidney disease groups here in Texas. So all of these groups coming together and just amplifying the voices of the rare disease community, I think it really could have an impact on the way that we are doing precision medicine at the Dell Medical School. Babe?
I think it's a natural evolution for Austin. We've had our tech boom. Now it's time for our biotech boom. My dream is that when people think of Austin, they'll think of the University of Texas. They'll think of barbecue. But I also want them to think of a place where people work to save lives. And I think that would be a great thing to have, as people say, oh, Austin, Texas, oh, they save a lot of children there. I think that would be something that we could all be proud of, and I think people in Austin would be proud of that.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.